Hello and welcome back. I'm Karen Sullivan of Soul Symbols, and this is our Friday contemplation. On Mondays, I look at the wider sky, the broad view and the larger pattern, and that archetypal web moving through our collective field. And on Fridays, I come down to the ground, into our lived reality, and that felt texture of a pattern. So we will be moving on Fridays into deeper explorations of not only what it means in the sky, but in our bodies, choices, relationships, and in the deeper architecture of life. So get your headphones, put your feet up, and enjoy this reflection with me. Over the past few weeks, I've been following the Cancer lunation cycle on the Friday Muse through the myth of Demeter and Persephone. Before we begin, I just want to say that the subject of descent contains some difficult material. I raise subjects including bereavement and grief, sexual, physical abuse, addiction, long-term illness, amongst other subjects. Take care of yourself, and if you feel this material will be too heavy for you, then skip this one. In Darkness, Descent and the Work of Being here, I reflected on Demeter as somebody who embodies the grief that radiates around a person or community directly affected. I also looked at her withdrawal and how that exposes what happens when suffering is ignored and the wider order tries to continue unchanged. Then in Hekate at the Threshold, I looked at how she embodied ethical witnessing. Hekate hears, believes, accompanies and helps bring hidden suffering into visibility without making herself the centre of it. We've now reached the dark moon and the final phase of this lunar cycle. The visible light has withdrawn and we're approaching the beginning of something new. So for this reflection, I want to return to Persephone herself. And Persephone embodies the changed relationship to experience. She returns carrying the underworld with her, able to participate in life while knowing that loss, death and vulnerability remain part of its rhythm. And the Cancer lunation is so poignant for me. It marks between the Cancer new moon and the day before the Leo new moon. My mother had surgery and she died within that period. So I understand and I hold within me the light before that event and a totally new perception after it. So I'm speaking this from knowing. So I really want to think about those sudden experiences that divide life into that before and after. I also want to consider the grief experienced by the people around us and the importance of someone who witnesses what's happened and the gradual development of a new relationship with an experience that just can't be undone. So the myth begins with a really ordinary moment. Persephone is gathering flowers in a meadow. She's young, absorbed in what she's doing. She's still held within the world of her mother, Demeter. And then the earth opens. Hades, the god of the underworld, her father's brother, rises from the underworld in his chariot. He seizes Persephone and abducts her to beneath the ground. And the speed of this moment really matters. There's no warning. Persephone doesn't have an opportunity to prepare herself for the world she's about to enter. One moment she's gathering flowers, the next everything she knows has disappeared. And as I said, I recognise that division, but many of us will recognise this division between before and after. And that moment can arrive through a telephone call, a diagnosis, an accident, or the sudden death of someone we love. It can come through the end of a relationship that we thought was secure. It might begin with the loss of a job, a home, or the physical ability to do something we once took for granted. It can come through the news of our child in peril, physically, sexually, emotionally, or through addiction. Sometimes the earth opens through a betrayal. We discover the life we thought we were living was built upon something we didn't know. There's also slower events that feel sudden when we finally understand their meaning. So that period of exhaustion that becomes an illness, we can make a series of small compromises which become a realization that we've lost contact with ourselves. We may have a difficult relationship that reaches the point where we can't pretend anymore that things will improve through patience alone. These experiences alter our relationship with time. We remember the final ordinary morning, the last conversation, or the person we were before we knew what was coming. We can find ourselves returning repeatedly to that moment when the ground opened, wondering whether something could have been seen or prevented. And when I look at Cancer and the lunation cycle, I'm also looking at not just the myth, but the symbolism around it. In tarot, Cancer is associated with the Chariot, while the moon, the ruler of Cancer, is associated with the high priestess. In myth, Hades uses his chariot to carry Persephone across the boundary between the upper world and the underworld. She's moved from one reality into another before she's had any time to understand what's happening. This gives the chariot a different quality from the familiar idea of determination, control, and progress. Sometimes life is moving, although we're not the ones directing it. In the Rider-Waite, the charioteer is not holding the reins. So this, in our lives, can look at the body being placed into an ambulance. A family may be moved from their home by war or disaster. A person might find themselves entering a hospital, a courtroom, a funeral home, and carried into a reality they never, ever imagined would become part of their life. When something earth-shattering happens, the person at the centre of it isn't the only one who descends. Demeter experiences Persephone's disappearance from the world above. She hears the absence before she understands what's happened. She searches across the earth and she's carrying torches and asking for news of her daughter. She's trying to find light in the darkness here. Demeter represents the grief that gathers around the person whose world has been shattered. She can be the parent watching a child live through illness, addiction, or the consequences of violence. She may be the partner caring for someone after an accident, grieving the life they expected to share. She can be the friend who watches someone disappear into depression and feels helpless before the depth of their pain. When someone survives a life-changing experience, those around them still feel that they've lost the person they knew. That person can look the same, remain physically present, yet something within the relationship has changed. Maybe that someone's body has a new limit, or trust has been altered, or the future once imagined together is no longer possible. Those close to us can long for the person we were before the descent. They often encourage us to get back to normal because they are also grieving the normality that's been lost. Demeter can't simply accept Persephone's disappearance and continue on as before. In the myth, she withdraws from the company of the gods. She moves among human beings in disguise, and she's carrying a grief that has changed her relationship with her own power. Eventually, she withdraws her fertility from the earth, so the crops fail. and the land becomes barren, and the consequences of Persephone's disappearance spread far beyond the relationship between mother and daughter. And for me, this is where the myth begins to speak about collective grief. We often think of grief as private experience, but that grief moves through families, friendships, it moves through communities and whole societies. When a community experiences violence, displacement, or disaster, the impact enters the shared life. Schools, hospitals, homes, and places of gathering are affected, and those ordinary rhythms that hold people together are interrupted. We also live with the knowledge of suffering beyond our immediate lives. Through our screens, we see people grieving children, homes, and communities. We're witnessing families displaced by conflict and people living without safety, food, or reliable shelter. But we need to be careful about the way we speak of collective grief. The suffering of someone living through war or oppression is their own lived reality, and watching from a distance is a really different experience. But that distance doesn't remove the connection. We're connected through our common humanity, but also through the political decisions, economic systems, and the ways in which resources and power move across the world. Demeter's withdrawal asks what happens when the wider order expects life to continue while people were suffering. The other gods on Olympus initially continue with the arrangement that's been made. Persephone's been taken, Demeter's grieving, Hades rules below, and Zeus remains above. But Demeter's refusal interrupts this apparent stability. The barren earth reveals that the order itself has become unsustainable. The suffering of one mother can no longer be treated as a private matter. Her grief has entered the material conditions of life. And there are times when grief needs to interrupt business as usual. A march, vigil, or public memorial creates a pause in the ordinary movement of the day. The names of the dead are spoken, people who might otherwise become numbers and statistics, a return to human relationship. A grieving family often begin a campaign because they don't want another family to experience the same loss. And survivors may speak publicly because silence would allow the conditions that harmed them to continue. These actions can emerge from grief without resolving it or changing what has happened. But they give grief movement and relationship. They create the possibility that suffering can be recognised and that something within the wider world may change. And in the myth, Hekate enters the story as the one who hears, the witness. When Persephone cries out, Hekate hears her voice from her cave. But she doesn't know exactly what's happened, but she knows a cry occurred. So she approaches Demeter, Persephone's mother, and joins her search. They carry torches through the darkness. So Hekate is offering us an image, an archetype of witness. A witness can't undo what's happened. They can't remove the grief or return the world to its previous form. Their presence says the experience won't be denied. Sometimes this can begin with the simple words, I believe you. For someone who's experienced abuse, betrayal, or trauma, being believed might be the first point at which the experience becomes bearable enough to speak about. At other times, witness means staying present when there's no use for words. After a death, people often receive intense support in the first days and weeks. They have unending messages, food is brought to them, practical tasks are taken over. But as time passes, the world expects a return to normal life. The person who's grieving may still be living inside a reality that others have already left. But it's here that Hekate remains. She represents the friend who remembers the anniversary. She's the person who can hear the same story over and over without trying to hurry it towards a conclusion. She might appear through a counsellor, a support group, or a community where people recognise one another's experience without that need in lengthy explanations around it. Collective witnessing asks for something similar as well. We can listen to people who are living through war, oppression, or displacement without claiming that experience as our own. We can share their testimony, support organisations working directly within their communities, and challenge language that removes their humanity. We can also write to those who hold political power and attend gatherings, contribute financially when we're able, or offer practical support within our local communities. And these acts often feel small beside the scale of suffering. Yet Hecate's torch is also small. It doesn't illuminate the entire underworld, but it creates enough light for the next part of the journey. No single person can carry the grief of the world, and community allows responsibility to be shared. One person speaks while another listens, and someone can create a place for people to gather. Another brings food, offers transport, raises money, or keeps the memory of what happened alive. Over time, these acts can form a beautiful collective response to suffering. No act is too small. It's one part of a whole jigsaw. Persephone eventually returns from the underworld, but she doesn't return unchanged. She was compelled by Hades to eat the pomegranate seeds, and now she belongs partly to the world below. So she will spend 2/3 of the year with Demeter and 1/3 with Hades. And this part of the myth can really feel uncomfortable. Persephone's return is incomplete, and her life's acquired a rhythm that she didn't originally choose. But this incomplete return of Persephone makes her story really recognisable to us. After an earth-shattering experience, we rarely return to the person we were before it happened. A person who's been bereaved may experience joy again, while continuing to carry the person who died into future birthdays, holidays, and family gathering, and feeling keenly their absence from it. Someone who may be recovering from an accident, they might regain much of their independence while developing a different relationship with their body. And that person who's left a damaging or abusive relationship can build a new life while remaining alert to the signs they once overlooked, or carrying that tension physically. Someone who survives serious illness can return to familiar routines with a changed understanding of time and what deserves their energy. And Persephone becomes that figure who can move between the worlds. It's also the imagery and symbolism of the high priestess in the tarot. So the high priestess sits between a dark pillar and a light pillar, with the crescent moon at her feet, but behind her is a veil decorated with pomegranates. That pomegranate has become part of the landscape she's inhabiting. So that high priestess can be seen as an image of Persephone after the descent. She's not appearing in that card as the young woman gathering flowers in the meadow. She sits at the boundary between the visible world and the hidden one, and she's carrying knowledge that can't be fully explained. People who've lived through grief or trauma often speak about feeling separate from those who've not had the same experience. They can find ordinary conversations really difficult for a time, and the concerns that once occupied them can seem either distant or really small. They often have a new sensitivity to the suffering of others. Having encountered vulnerability directly, they recognise it more quickly in the world around them and the people around them. And this knowledge can deepen compassion, but it can also be really tiring to carry. Persephone's relationship with the underworld becomes part of who she is. Her experience doesn't need to become the only story about her, because she becomes the queen of the underworld while remaining the daughter who returns to Demeter. She's holding both relationships. Towards the end of the Homeric hymn, Demeter establishes her sacred rites at Eleusis. The precise content of the Eleusinian mysteries was kept secret, but the mysteries were connected with Demeter and Persephone and the cycle of the seasons and those human encounters with mortality. So it gives the myth a really profound final moment. That private experience of abduction and grief becomes the foundation of a shared ritual tradition. The suffering is not ignored or explained, it's carried into community. People gather to encounter the realities of death, loss, renewal, and return. And ritual gives form to experience that can otherwise feel shapeless and overwhelming. We still create these forms. We hold funerals and wakes and gather for vigils. We build memorials and return to them on anniversaries. Sometimes we light candles, share food, and tell stories about those who are absent. But I'm also aware there are those who are alone in their grief and no longer have the people from their past around to share those stories with. After collective tragedy, people often create places where grief can be expressed publicly, when names can be read aloud, photographs displayed. Music and silence help hold what can't be contained by ordinary conversation. Communities also create practical rituals of care. Meals are organised for family in crisis, funds are raised, people accompany one another to appointments, court hearings, or difficult meetings. A group might form because those involved understand that an experience becomes heavier when carried alone. The Eleusinian mysteries suggest that grief can become a form of knowledge. Through grief, we learn that life moves in cycles and that each cycle contains loss. We learn that the body and the earth have rhythms that can't always be controlled. And we learn that love leaves us vulnerable to absence. We may also learn that life continues to create relationship around what has been lost. When spring returns, it's not erasing winter, it's carrying the memory of winter within it. And in the same way, Persephone rises, the earth becomes fertile again, yet she'll descend again. Demeter knows that reunion and separation now belong to the same cycle. As we reach the dark moon, the visible moon of the lunation, the Cancer lunation cycle, has disappeared from the sky. Her absence forms part of her rhythm. This phase invites us to acknowledge what has changed during that Cancer lunation cycle. Some experience would have altered us, some grief remains active within us. There are parts of ourselves or our shared world that still need a witness. The dark moon also asks, how will we carry what we know into the next cycle? And there is absolutely no need to resolve every feeling before something new can begin. Persephone returns while still connected to the underworld. And perhaps our task is to develop a relationship with a person we have become. We can honour those who've grieved around us, even when their grief looked different from our own. We can remember those who heard us and carried a torch when we couldn't see the way forward. We can also consider where we're being asked to witness the suffering of others. Is there a voice that needs to be heard or a story that needs to be shared? Is there a community that needs practical support? Our contributions can be quiet and seem really small, but those shared acts of care create the structures through which grief becomes bearable and change becomes possible. The story of Demeter, Hekate and Persephone reminds us that no descent belongs entirely to one person. The loss affects those who love us, the witness becomes part of the journey, and the person who returns carries a different relationship with life. And sometimes from within that experience, a community creates new ways of remembering, supporting and accompanying one another. As we close this Cancer lunation cycle, if you feel comfortable, I invite you to reflect on the experience that divided your life into before and after. Who grieved beside you? Who heard your cry? What knowledge did you carry back? And where might your own small act of witness help someone else feel less alone? If you're still here, thank you for listening. Thank you for joining me for these 3 Friday Muses over this lunation cycle. So, yeah, thank you for following this story of Demeter, Hecate and Persephone through the cycle. And the Friday Muse will return as we begin the next lunar chapter. But allow yourself some space to reflect and listen to what this cycle has revealed and to notice what you're ready to carry forward. And that is what I have for you. Thank you for being here. And I'll be back on Monday with the broader picture of the sky. And until then, I invite you to be tender with yourselves. Be honest with what is surfacing and listen carefully for what is alive at depth. Have a restful weekend, and I will see you on the next one.